Please give it up for Ish, everybody.
Hello, so my name is Ish. I'm an independent app developer. I've been developing apps for about 10 years now, long time. And today I'm going to talk about subscriptions on the App Store. So, there's been a lot of folks talking about subscriptions and Apple's recent level of services. And a lot of apps seem to be adopting this model. So how do you know if subscriptions are right for your app, though? Well, what are the metrics for determining a business model is right for you or not? Two things to really consider are sustainability and customer satisfaction. And what I learned the hard way is that if your app isn't sustainable, then there will be no customers to satisfy. So let's look at sustainability. In this context, sustainability means making sure the costs of developing and updating the app don't exceed the revenue the app brings in over its lifetime. The lifetime isn't always considered. So when I first started developing apps, I was honestly just happy to get sales. I didn't really begin with a plan, which is important. It's important to think about how things will look in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, or even longer. So let's look at the costs of development. There's development, the developer program. If you get custom assets, I can't see down here. There's hosting, potentially. If you have APIs running in the background, the marketing costs, the legal costs, and then the time. So time is an interesting one. Your time has value even if you don't see it. Indies often discount their own time. I'm like, oh, I'm doing this in my free time. Turns out there's no such thing. A good way to get a rough value for your time is to consider what happens if you go on vacation or you need to tend to the illness of a loved one. And you need to just basically outsource the work and get it done. So the contract rates for an iOS developer in the US range from about $75 to $135 an hour. That's about $600 a day or $3,000 a week. If it takes about 12 weeks to make an app, so this is really like a small app, that's about $36,000. And then there are updates. You have to consider the time and therefore the cost of updating your app. How frequently will you update the app? Imagine we stick with the $75 an hour labor rate. And our app takes about 1 day to update. It's reasonable to update an app every 2 weeks. We see it all the time. Now with bug fixes. But let's say it's once a quarter. So 4 updates a year will cost about $2,400. And if you extrapolate that over 10 years, we do 4 updates a year, 10 years, that's 40 updates, $2,400 a pop. That's another $24,000. That brings our 10-year total to $60,000 of development fees. So, how are we going to do this without going broke? Let's look at our options. Common options are free, paid upfront, ads, in-app purchases, or subscriptions. Let's take a look at free first. Let's start with free. No strings, no in-app purchases, no ads. The pros are customers love free. But just looking at the developer program, after 5 years, you're out $500. After 10 years, you're down about $1,000. It still takes time and therefore cost to build the app. So it costs even more. There is the philosophy that you could just make it up in volume. The idea that eventually the cost for development and updates will be covered. So my friend Joe here said, app developers need to realize the economics of the App Store, allow you to make it up in volume. You can choose to charge 2,000 users $50 every year, or you can charge 500,000 users $0 every year. It's simple math, folks. Joe's joking, but for most apps, this massive volume will never come. And I think there's plenty of room in the App Store to serve lower volume customers. It's wise to consider a way to sustain apps that don't have several hundred thousands of users. So paid up front, the original model. There are less than 12% of the apps in the store now with the paid up front model. Now, it's a great way to make sure that development costs are covered because you have a 100% conversion rate. Every single user you have that has the app has paid for the app, so that's great. But without careful planning, the app can lose money after a few years. That's what I learned after about 5 to 7 years, the scale started to tip a little bit. Existing customers aren't paying for updates. So all of the revenue that you need to fund updates comes from future customers. Ads. Customers love free, and ads are free for them. So if you do pure ad support, they get the app for free, they just have the ads. But there tends to be a bit of a moral cost though, right? So in addition to getting the revenue for ads seems to be really, really tiny. So you actually need those hundreds of thousands of users to make real revenue. Ads are annoying, they have privacy concerns, and honestly, they're not always available. Something that Natasha actually told me a few years ago is when thinking about apps, don't think about apps, think about features and functions. And turns out that ended up being true. She told me that maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. This was before Siri shortcuts, right? So if your app is a utility app or a productivity app, what you really want to do is get your user in and out of the app as soon as possible. And sometimes that means making like a Siri shortcut, which means the app never even launches and no one will even see the ad. So that's something to consider. Then there's in-app purchases, right? So one advantage of in-app purchase is that users get to play with the app a little bit before they use it, so they're more comfortable with it. But now you've introduced the conversion issue. So every user that gets the app won't necessarily convert and bring money in. And it really only funds the initial cost of the feature. So even though it's like an added feature, you're only really funding that initial cost of it. If you need to do an update on it later, put it in dark mode, that initial purchase didn't cover that. So it really just kind of kicks the can down the road a little bit and has the same issues as paid up front, but just with a prerequisite that the user already has downloaded the app and only a certain like sliver of those users will then want the in-app purchase. So kind of the same negatives, just delayed. All right, so that brings us to subscriptions. The good, the bad, the ugly. The good. Subscriptions have recurring revenue, which is nice. That means that over time, money continues to flow in, so updates are funded. Subscriptions are also the most profitable model from Apple. The first year, Apple takes their 30% cut, like every other model. But after the first year, any subscriber that stays on board, Apple only takes 15%. So then you're getting 85% of the purchase price instead of the 70, which is, as I mentioned, smaller than any other model. Updates are funded. There are free trials. I'll talk a little bit later about free trials, but they can be compelling that a user gets to kind of check out the app before using it. It's actually called introductory pricing. And apps with auto-renewable subscriptions can now provide something called offers. So it's basically, but wait, there's more. So if the user has either subscribed in the past and cancels a subscription, or they're currently a subscriber, you can provide special offers and incentives to bring them back, like a 50% discount if they were to sign up again. It's helpful to kind of re-engage any customers that you may have lost. Subscriptions can also be promoted individually in the App Store. So promoted subscriptions show up in search on the App Store, and also Apple has their own like feature section, like featuring subscriptions. So you can get more visibility than you have with the traditional models. The bad, of course, everything isn't rainbows and sunshine. Subscriptions are notoriously tricky to implement. They have, there's 200 different pricing tiers with subscriptions. And like I mentioned, there are different ways of doing introductory offers and things like that. There historically have also been a lot of hoops to jump through to get them approved. Luckily, recently, Apple modified the human interface guidelines to kind of give some direction. Because before that, you were basically just kind of guessing what they want. You submit an app, it would get rejected and submitted again, get rejected. But then other apps with the same things would kind of get through. There was no guidance. But since January of this year, they've added some guidance on how to design your in-app subscription so they won't get rejected. Okay. So receipts are kind of good in that you can keep track of things, but these end up being very tricky to handle, and oftentimes what you need is an external validation server, and then also downloading a private key from Apple servers that you can only download the one time, and managing that. So that's it's required for the offers and optional with the other ones, but there's a lot of work that you have to do in maintaining that. And subscriptions are pretty tricky to test. So I brought out an app at the end of last year called Capsicum. And I decided that I really didn't like the introductory offer in the way that Apple did it, so I made my own. And it worked fine in testing, but then when I actually put it up on the store, I had an issue where 5,000 people tried to subscribe, and 5 were successful. Yeah. Pains me still. Okay. So I listed that the free trial. Oh, that's different. So users prefer free unlimited updates for life. And that's really not what subscriptions are. It's a pro for the developer that there's recurring revenue, but from the consumer side, it kind of feels yucky, honestly, to be charged multiple times. And customers will absolutely let you know. Yeah. So these are all folks who never even bothered to try the app. They just saw a subscription and was like, what? 1 star out of this, a moral choice. So that's something, so the other thing is users really dislike change. So subscriptions are kind of new. And if you have an older app with an existing business model and then switch to subscription, be prepared. Because those comments that was for a brand new app. If they've already paid and they kind of had the feeling they would have unlimited updates for life, then they're going to be angry. That does calm down, but there's an initial rush of just fury of, why am I paying? I paid 99 cents 5 years ago. Why would you charge me again? Which I've kind of explained before, right? I was like, just say you saw Fast and the Furious 1 and you paid for it. Do you still expect that same amount would be valid for all of the 17 sequels they've had afterwards? Why would you pay again? All right, paid for the original. As things update and they change, and it's kind of new. Let's see. So something else to look out for is many schools can't buy subscription-based apps. So if you have an educational app meant to be used by teachers, you might really want to think twice before implementing subscriptions because they won't be able to buy it with the volume program. There's also no family sharing, which is kind of a huge downside because a lot of families will share apps. They'll buy it, pay for it, and then kind of share it among the family, but you can't do it with subscriptions. It's kind of per iCloud account. So let's talk about the ugly. There are a lot of scam apps that take advantage of that free trial thing. And they're basically betting the user will either forget or won't be able to figure out how to cancel their trial. And because of that, subscriptions have gotten kind of a really bad name. Subscriptions have notoriously been difficult to cancel. It's getting a little bit better. But to give an example, there are some apps that were charging $99 a week for a QR reader. By the way, your phone can do QR reading just by using the camera app. $99 a week for QR reading, right? And because subscriptions are difficult to cancel, folks were getting charged and not realizing it till 6 or 7 weeks later. because it was buried under like a whole bunch of like different settings to go through. Now, the recommendation from Apple is to add a link into your app that links directly to subscription so you can cancel. But if you're planning on scamming people, of course you don't have that. It's not a requirement. Right? So how can customers manage subscriptions? It's easier in recent releases of iOS 12.4 and for sure 13. You can go to the App Store, tap your profile image up in the upper right-hand corner, then tap Manage Subscriptions. Then you see a list of all the subscriptions you can manage, and then you can tap Cancel. That's only 4 steps. Apple actually put out a video in the spring with the prior version. It's like, just follow these easy 14 steps, and then people eventually do it, I guess. But like I mentioned, the best way to do it is to include a link in your app. So here's a couple apps that do a good job of it. You just have a button. It's easy to see. Users can tap it and then manage your subscriptions. So my personal feeling is you really don't want a subscriber who doesn't want your app. You don't want to hold customers like hostile. You want them to be happy. Because honestly, the quick buck you could make in like scamming them, it's not going to give you any long-term growth. It's just going to eventually fizzle out and die over time. So be nice to your users. Other downside, super ugly, no refunds. So according to Apple, you cannot request refunds for recurring charges, but you can cancel a subscription or downgrade. So like I mentioned before, in the situation that you bought this $99 a week QR code reader and you didn't notice it until your credit card statement came out, that money is theirs now. There's really nothing you can do to get that back, which is a problem, and also turns people off to future subscriptions. Like, if you've ever had that situation where you've ended up paying like $1,200 for like a weather app, it really turns you off to ever trying any app that has subscriptions again, which is probably why those 1-star reviews came out like right away without even trying it. New in iOS 13, if you delete an app now, it'll actually prompt you to let you know that you have active subscriptions, and you can go into management and cancel it, which is awesome. Because before that, what some people would do, be like, what? I'm spending hundreds of dollars a month on things I don't want. I would just delete the app, which does nothing. Right? There's no way to cancel those subscriptions. It was interesting because I remember when the Apple Card came out, a lot of folks were like, there's no way to manage this from the web. True. You also can't manage subscriptions from the web. You have to manage it through iOS. Okay. So where does that leave us? Picking a pricing model isn't easy, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Of the available options, I think subscriptions are often the best long-term solution, but they need to be used with care. And I got this from my daughter. If there's any questions or compliments, I'll be in office hours. Thank you.